Hi, y'all, and welcome to tonight's live stream. I have driven up to Kentucky. I've been inside the courtroom every day this week for the Brooks Houck trial. And it has been one of the most unusual first weeks of a trial that I've ever seen. Brooks Houck and Joey Lawson are accused of being involved in the disappearance and presumed murder of a beautiful young mother of 5, Crystal Rogers. The prosecution has brought in more than a dozen witnesses, and on paper, some of what they offered sounded really huge. There was a Louisville slugger. Could it have been the murder weapon? There was a bag of wet clothes. Could they have been worn in committing the murder, or could they have been Crystal Rogers' clothes? A woman said that she overheard one of the defendants, Joey Lawson, saying that talking about moving a body using a skid steer at the Houck family farm. And a man said he talked to Brooks Houck's mother and that she asked him if he could help her find someone to get rid of Crystal Rogers. So all of that sounds great for the Commonwealth. But what's happening inside that courtroom is more complicated than it looks from the outside. The jury is watching very closely, but of course, I believe that some of those bombshells didn't land quite the way the Commonwealth had hoped. We've seen witnesses who were pretty hesitant. They seemed confused, but most importantly of all, we have seen some witnesses who appear to have been pressured by law enforcement. And it has become a key theme of the defense. Is all that pressure that was put on the witnesses going to backfire on the prosecution? Is Brooks Houck, is Joey Lawson going to be able to turn that around against the Commonwealth? So tonight, I'm going to be recapping what we've seen thus far in the week. The evidence that really stood out, some of the problems. I'm going to be talking about what's working, what isn't working. And what I'm trying to do is, it's been a big week, and what I've done each week, I have over 100 pages of notes from the trial, and I have each night I try to summarize those for you, but I've summarized the summary. I'm trying to get it down really briefly to as short as I can do it and do it justice, so that you can really have a sense of what exactly has happened in the course of this week of trial. Now, Crystal Rogers disappeared 10 years ago. This has been so long in the coming. It'll be 10 years this week on Thursday that she was last seen, July 3rd, 2015. So this is absolutely overdue that there be a trial, that there be justice. The question is it going to happen in this trial? Is it even possible? So this is your chance to get caught up and you can always go back to the nightly ones for more details about that. Let me ask you, would you mind hitting the like button? That'll help the YouTube algorithm know that we're live and to get it out to more people. And if you aren't subscribed, we would love to have you as a subscriber. So special shout out to the first 5 in tonight's chat. Real Happy, Paulette, Fairy Dust, Jenny's Wonderland, and Terry Abbott. Thank you so much, and thanks everybody for being here tonight. The first thing I want to talk about is something that's completely not obvious if you're trying to follow on listening to some of the media or listening to some of the news reports. I'm going to try to see if I can get that a little straighter. You are not going to be able to hear about this. And that is just how complete the shutout of Joey Lawson is. There are 2 defendants on trial here. Brooks Houck is charged with murder, of actually murdering Crystal Rogers. But there's someone else on charge, and that's Joey Lawson. He's charged with conspiracy to commit murder and tampering with physical evidence. But he is almost not an entity in the trial. His lawyer rarely stands up. He says very little during the trial. And it's even down to the physical look of the layout of the room. There are so many lawyers involved in the case. And so there are about 5 lawyers plus Brooks Houck, who sit at the counsel table for the defense. Another woman sits directly behind Brooks Houck. And then the person on the end represents Joey, and then Joey sits in the very corner by the door. And then female attorney who represents him sits slightly more toward the front. Later in the week, they actually switched that up. The female attorney moved to the door and he moved one in, but he is just way away from the jury. He's almost not involved. And that is also showing up in terms of the evidence. And we heard in opening statements that the Commonwealth says both his father and he have confessed that they were involved in taking Crystal Rogers' car and leaving it on the side of the Blue Ridge Parkway, where it was discovered without Crystal, but with her purse and with her cell phone inside. And if so, then they were involved. But thus far, that evidence hasn't come in. Just about nothing related to Joey has come in. All right, now, and something I haven't mentioned, in case you're wondering, what is Brooks Houck wearing? What does he look like during the course of the trial? All of the attorneys are wearing suits. The men, dark suits. The women will be of different colors sometimes. But Brooks Houck wears a dress shirt, no jacket, usually something sort of colorful. He had green on one day, for example, and green, kind of a check or plaid. All right, so let's get started with what the opening statement said. The Commonwealth's theme was use your God-given common sense. Why are they so focused on that? It's because they don't have a lot of physical evidence. What they are going to have to hope the jury will follow and understand is their presentation of the circumstantial evidence. So that's why they're so focused on that. They also talked about Rosemary Houck and Nick Houck. Neither one of them is in this trial. In fact, they haven't even been charged. But the prosecutor stated up front in the opening statement that both of them were conspirators. In fact, he said that the moment when Rosemary Houck asked one of the witnesses you'll hear about later, could they find someone to get rid of Crystal? According to the prosecution, that's the quote beginning of the conspiracy. That is the very moment when it all started. So the prosecution said they believed that Crystal Rogers died that evening of the 3rd when Brooks and she went to the Houck family farm. And they said that her car was then taken over by the Bluegrass Parkway by Joey and Steve Lawson at about 10:30 p.m. I told you I'm trying to condense, so I'm going to be zipping through here. All right, so July 9th, evidence will show that Rosemary Houck was in a conspiracy to help Brooke Houck get rid of this young lady. That's as close to a quote as I could get. And they admitted they're not charged. Will they be? I don't know. There are some real problems with some of the evidence against Rosemary and whether or not it was coerced. You'll hear about that in just a minute. I am zipping through, like I said. All right, so let's talk about the defense. What was their primary focus? Because you're going to hear the evidence from the witnesses themselves as I tell you what they said. I just want to give you the focus of what each side said in opening. And the defense theme was pressure, that law enforcement was under intense pressure from the family of Crystal Rogers. And it wasn't just the family. There was also this publicity, this social media. There was an Oxygen docuseries, I think 6 parts. And that was, as he put it, pressure. The social media pressure, all of those things created this idea in the police that they needed to find somebody. They needed to get this done. And the theme throughout the defense was that this caused a dangerous break in our system of justice, that the police relied on coercion and manipulation and ended up charging Joey Lawson and Brooks Houck with horrible crimes that they did not commit. After thousands of hours of investigation from multiple agencies, 70 different search warrants, dive teams, excavators, chemicals that were used to look for blood, at the end of all of that, and various phases of the investigation by different agencies, There was no evidence about the cause of Crystal Rogers' death. There was no evidence about where she was killed, no crime scene, no murder weapon, no eyewitness, and most importantly, no body to even definitely tell us that Crystal Rogers has died. That, according to the defense, means that there is a lot of reasonable doubt. And they waited 10 years to try, 8 years to charge and 10 years to try Brooks, Houck, and Joey Lawson. And all of what happened in the course of this, where they were trying so diligently to try to make sure that they convicted Brooks Houck, in the course of that, the defense said, the Houck family became really paranoid, basically. They circled the wagons. They saw everyone as the enemy. They believed they were being pursued by law enforcement and the community, because they were. And that ended up making them sometimes look guilty and making them behave in ways that were interpreted as them being guilty. What happened toward the end of toward the disappearance of Crystal Rogers suggested, this is all according to the defense, so there was nothing really going on between Brooks Houck and Crystal Rogers. They'd had trouble in the past. It wasn't a perfect relationship, but their last text messages were, I love you and I love you. So they weren't in a spot where they were at the point of breakup, much less murder. So, and there were some pieces of physical evidence that were found. For example, fingerprints in the car, DNA in the car, and some hairs in the car, but ultimately none of that tested or connected with Brooks Houck, with Joey Lawson, or with Stephen Lawson. The hairs in the car were in the end not tested. They were long hairs, and so the prosecution decided not to bother to test those because they could not possibly have been Joey and Steve. They had short hair, so it must have been someone else. They blamed, the defense did, an extremely aggressive prosecutor, Shane Young, who targeted Brooks Houck unjustly and unfairly. And ultimately, the flaw in the state's case is that with no body, not one piece of physical evidence, no murder weapon, that all they ever have had in the past or have today is just this, quote, knee-jerk suspicion of the Houck family. That's all there was. So we started off, first witness out of the gate was Crystal Rogers' oldest daughter, Kylie. And she talked about how close she was to her mother, how she was her best friend. It was very moving. She was, of course, tearful as she talked about it. Beautiful young woman. She described the day on July 4th, when she kept calling her mom and her mom wasn't answering. And they talked every day, all the time. And it was really odd that she wasn't answering. And she asked Brooks Houck, where's mom? She was 14 at the time, by the way. And he told her, she's out with Sabrina. Sabrina was the cousin of Crystal Rogers. So Kylie figured, well, okay, that makes sense. That could be. Our second witness was Christina Holly. And this was a far different affair in terms of its effectiveness and kind of how it went. She was friends with both Crystal and with Brooks Houck. And she had a couple of pieces of important information. One was related to what happened the night that Crystal was last seen. Because what prosecutors believe happened is that she thought she was going on a romantic evening out with her boyfriend. They lived together, and she thought they had babysitters for all five of her kids. They had one together, and that was Eli, the fifth child, and thought they were going to be kid-free, and they were going to be going out, and they were going to be having a really fun time. That isn't what happened, and we'll talk about what that was in a minute. But what Christina Holly said was that she, in fact, was told in text messages, which were introduced and shown to the jury, that they were being told that Crystal said, yeah, we've got a babysitter for all 5 kids. I can't go to pizza with you tonight because we're going to be doing this. And they made plans to meet a different time. And Christina said, so you're going to be having sexy time? And Crystal Rogers said, yes, that was what was going to be happening. Far from it, of course. And Brooks Houck, she also said, was concerned, this was the second big piece of information from her, that Crystal would take Eli. They were having some trouble and some difficulties, and she was concerned about that. And let me make sure I haven't switched witnesses, because I didn't. Yep, I'm still in the witness. Okay. I'm trying to shorten. So that Brooks Houck was concerned Crystal would take Eli if they split up, because she said they were having trouble. So this special date night was a really good thing, and that it was something that would maybe keep them together, that Brooks was really worried about losing the 2-year-old Eli. In fact, she said that Crystal Rogers and Brooks Houck never went out in public together. And the reason was that Brooks Houck's mother, Rosemary, very much disapproved of Crystal. She didn't like her hair, which apparently was pink. She had, or at least partly, she didn't like the fact that she was a mother of 4. And she just said, and Mama don't like that. That's what Christina said. But on cross, what we heard from the defense and what the witness acknowledged was that Crystal Rogers had really cut off this friend to a large degree, because the friend, Christina, had a problem with recreational drug use and was on pills and wasn't, according to Crystal, getting her act together. She needed to get her act together. So the only reason she went over and saw Crystal that day was she was trying to get off pills. She was having withdrawals, and she ended up having diarrhea while she was in the neighborhood. So she stopped by Crystal's house really fast. And that's how they kind of got connected that day. Now, the third witness was a second cousin named Amanda of Crystal's. She saw Crystal that day just by chance at Walmart. Crystal had some of her kids with her, and Amanda was also with some of her kids and her mother. And she also got the news from Crystal that she was going on a surprise date with her boyfriend, Brooks. She was very excited, according to Amanda, and really looking forward to it. And then we moved into the real meat of the case from Detective John Snow, who was the lead investigator until he retired in 2019. So he retired 6 years ago, but the case still is pending, obviously. So Sherry Ballard, Crystal's mother, reported her missing on July 5th. That is extremely important, because remember, the last time Crystal was seen was July 3rd. No one reported her missing on July 4th. On the 5th, her mother was so concerned that she wasn't returning text messages or answering her phone that she talked to Brooks about it, said, I think we ought to report it. And he didn't really respond, so she did it herself. She reported it. And that same day, on the 5th, friends of the family found Crystal's car on the side of the road on the Blue Ridge Parkway, and they called and they let the family know. The family then called law enforcement. The car had a flat tire, and leading up to that was a black mark on the road and then the car on the side. In other words, it really did look like she actually, or whoever was driving the car, had a flat tire right there, because there was a mark on the roadway leading right to where the car was. Inside the vehicle, her purse, her cell phone, and child items, and no Crystal. She has never been seen or heard from again. The FBI, looking at that tire, found a piece of metal in the tire had caused it to go flat. It was not something new, though. It wasn't as if this piece of metal was put in there to cause it to have a flat tire, because according to Detective Snow, Crystal had been adding air to that tire for a while. It had been leaking and maybe just went further this time. Brooks Houck did not report Crystal Rogers missing. That is a key part of what the prosecution, what the Commonwealth says in this case. Why wouldn't you report your wife missing? Brooks says he woke up the morning of the 4th and Crystal just wasn't there. Eli, their son, who slept with them, is there, and Crystal's not. Why didn't he report that? Now, Brooks Houck is going to have an explanation. He's going to say he did contact someone in law enforcement, a friend of theirs who was a police officer, and asked her help finding Crystal. He thought that she must have gotten upset and gone to be with friends and was just not responding to him personally. So Brooks was interviewed on the 5th, just as they found the car 2 days after the last time she was seen. And she was last seen late in the day, according to Brooks. And he was asked to give a very detailed timeline. And I can't tell you how many times the detective said in the description, make it detailed, make it really detailed. I want everything, every move you made. And what he did was he gave a very detailed timeline between about 4 and about 7:30. Like, I went here, I went there, I did this, I did that, all those sorts of things. But what he did not give was much detail around that. He couldn't seem to remember anything he'd done on the 4th or anything he'd done on the 5th, no specifics. And he also had a very vague set of things that were more like a to-do list that he had for the daytime of the 3rd. Things like, well, I need to find addresses to give to somebody, I need to do this and I need to do that. General things that he would have been working on with his construction business, but not really, I went here and I met with so-and-so and I called this person. He didn't do any of that. It wasn't that specific. So, but what he said was that he did these various things during the day. At 4:30, he went home and stopped at various places on the way or was at home. He had a pretty good detailed outline. And then at about 7:15, 7:30, they went to his family farm, he and Crystal. And that farm, they stayed there until right about midnight, a little bit after, according to some surveillance video that Detective Snow and other law enforcement found. And about 12:15 or so, he got home. He went to bed at 12:30. That's basically his story of what happened. Now, you can probably already see some problems with that story. One is, remember the big date night that Crystal was about to have? Well, that just doesn't really seem to fit with that story. He says, yeah, it was Crystal's idea to go to my mother's, his mother lived on the farm. It was her idea to go to the family farm. That was what she wanted to do. So what you have then is he's saying that she thinks she's having this great date night. It's going to be real romantic, lots of fun. She's excited about it. And her idea for the date night is to go to the family farm owned by a woman who really dislikes her and to take their 2-year-old child with them. Let me add a little bit more to that. It rained all day. So it was raining throughout the evening and it would have been muddy there at the farm. According to Brooks, they went, they fed the cows, they walked on a trail in the back there of the farm property, and they just spent 4 hours out there in the rain walking around. And it's quite the story, quite the date night. I'm sure all of you are thinking, gee, if only I could find some fella like that. A really fun date night there. All right, so then he comes home. Depending on when you listen to him, he goes to bed at about 12:30, and either he says, well, often when I go to bed, Crystal is on her phone playing games and Eli is running around the house. Or he specifically said, in fact, she was on her phone that very night and Eli was running around the house when I went to bed. Well, but one of the big arguments that Brooks' team makes is that he was very forthcoming whenever they wanted anything. His phone, here it is. Crystal's phone, no problem. Search my house. He just agreed to everything. He didn't really fight that. one detail I want to be sure to mention about that night at the farm, and they had, I guess you could call it a family bonfire or something, but he normally took construction debris from his construction sites. He had many of them, and he would take debris and he would burn it at the farm, he said. So in fact, that night he lit the burn pile and was burning substances. Now, of course, law enforcement checked that and they didn't find anything in that, like DNA or clothes or anything that would have suggested that there was something illicit about that. All right, we finished notebook 1, and that was the one I had the most to tell you about. So we are on the downhill, uphill. Marlon is asking me about the microphone. Yes, it's on. I think the problem is this. At home, I can put my microphone right here, but I can't really do that here without doing, I guess I could kind of do that. Could I do that? Maybe put it to the side. I think that'll be better. It's going to be a little harder for me. Let's see if we can make it work though. And thank you, Marlon, for being a member for 16 months. Marlon, in fact, is one of our moderators. We have 2, Pinky and Marlon are our moderators, and I am ever so grateful for them. Marlon also did the outro that you're going to hear at the end of this. It is awesome. It's a cartoon. It's just great. You're going to love it. And 16 months is how long we've had members. So thank you, Marlon. Marlon also did all the emojis that our members get to use. So those emojis you're using, you can thank Marlon for those. Okay, day 2. Boy, that was a blistering fast day. We had 12 or 13 witnesses that day. It was just blazing fast. We had the end of Detective John Snow's testimony, and they played a Kentucky State Police interview of Brooks Houck, audio only, so the courtroom could not hear it. The jury was given these special earpieces so they could actually hear it. They had special headphones, but they summarized a couple of things at the end, so we got that much. And one was that Brooks Houck was asked, what's the worst thing that ever happened to you? And he couldn't seem to come up with an answer. Obviously, I think they wanted him to say the disappearance of Crystal or something like that. It seems like a lot has gone wrong for him here, so maybe he was having trouble picking. The second thing was that they said in this audio interview, he clearly said that Crystal Rogers was playing games on her phone. Not that she could have been, but that she was. Why is this so important? Well, the answer is because, and the defense has to acknowledge it, Crystal Rogers' phone was dead. It was not turned on at all after 9:30 at night. So she could not have been playing on her phone. She couldn't have been playing games or on her phone in any way. And that is a problem that the defense was trying to deal with by suggesting that the reason he said that was because she usually did that and he didn't remember what she was doing that night. But that wasn't the only place where he was very clear about it. They also put on an audio clip from an interview he did with Nancy Grace. And in that, he stated very clearly that Crystal Rogers was on her phone. He said it twice. So he was given he took an hour and 20 minutes to write out that complete statement of everything he had done, complete detail, absolutely everything. And he was asked, have you completed it? And he turned it over. It was presented to the jury. They each got a copy. It was like 8 pages, I think, in a white 3-ring binder. And that was where he was supposed to list all the very specific things. It wasn't very specific about what had happened that day on the 3rd. One of the reasons that's so important is because the Commonwealth says it has evidence about what he did because they know where his phone was, that his phone data shows he was at the farm all day on the 3rd. If he was at the farm all day, why not just say that is the Commonwealth's point of view? Why not just say I was at the farm? And so it was from the farm that I called so-and-so or did this or wrote out my plan for this. Why not just say that? Why not? Why the mystery? Why not just admit that's where you were? And they obviously think there must have been some plan behind the reason that he was there. He said Brooks Houck in the interview, which they played large parts of it for the jury, not all of it, but large parts of it, said that it was, if they had a fight in the past, she had gone to her cousin Sabrina's house or to her parents' house, that they always had a stressful relationship, but they always found themselves back together. He also went into some detail because the detective asked him about how far they went down the road there at the farm. The farm was really a big piece of property, and it was long, and they went all the way to the back of the property, he said. And I think that was important, not just because they spent 4 hours there. They had to have been doing something, right? And they had to have been figuring out something to do for 4 solid hours. So on Saturday, Brooks Houck says he moved a bulldozer, and the detective had noticed that it was moved, and he went into a very detailed drawing about why he was using the bulldozer that day. That there was a big door on the barn, water was going in front of it, it was creating a problem. And he added that Rosemary Houck was always complaining about the trash that he was bringing over there for the burn pile. And so what he was trying to do was just get rid of everything. And those are the things that he did. On Friday night, he did the burn pile. It sounded like he did it again on Saturday. I don't think he was completely clear. And then he also moved the bulldozer and dealt with this water problem. Now, there was a pretty interesting question from the Commonwealth, Detective Snow, actually from Detective Snow. And he said, you got your 2-year-old out there at the farm at midnight. Isn't that kind of late for a 2-year-old to be up? And Brooks said, no, well, that's normal. He stays up with Crystal, and Crystal is kind of a night owl. So that's the way it is. That's completely normal. So he woke up the next morning at 6 or 7 and immediately realized Crystal Rogers was not there. And he was, okay, what happened? Did you notice she wasn't there? He said, I noticed. And he went into this bizarre description about how she had fantasy parties with her sister Brooke, and they did stuff, and all the girls get together and they stay out. But that made zero sense in context, because up until they got home, it was already after midnight when they got home. She had no plans to go out. She and Eli are up, and she's supposedly sitting on the sofa playing games on her phone. What would suddenly cause them to schedule a party and call all their friends after midnight? That just seemed thrown in there. It was a very odd segue in his interview. In my opinion, he never really answered anything about what happened on the 4th or the 5th, just not really any detail. He said that whole story about how she was having sexy time and all of this, that it was all that she made that up to tell Kylie, her daughter. Kylie was really sensitive about the fact that her father, she didn't really have a father figure, and Crystal's other children did. So she didn't want to say, yeah, I'm kind of just pawning you up, and we're keeping Eli, because that might hurt Kylie's feelings. Now, the big problem with that is it didn't account for Christina Holly or Amanda. They both said that Crystal Rogers also told them that she was going to be going on this special date night with Brooks Houck. One of the things the Commonwealth believes is important about the interview is that toward the end of it, and there were many, but toward the end of the one that they played for the jury, all of a sudden, Brooks Houck gets a phone call from his brother, Nick. And when he hangs up, he's like, he thinks I should not keep doing this. They were at the end of a 2-hour interview. So they were already at the end, and the interviewer, Detective Snow, was kind of ending things and saying, okay, yeah, we're kind of through. But according to the Commonwealth, the fact that Nick thought he shouldn't be talking to the police, they say that's pretty important. That makes a pretty big difference. The Nancy Grace, we've already talked about. During the course of investigation, as you know, because the Commonwealth stated it in opening statements, they believe that Nick Houck may have been involved. They stated up front that they believed he was a conspirator involved in the murder and disappearance of Crystal Rogers. But he was a member of the police. He was on the police force there in Bardstown, and they took his cruiser to be processed. One of the points the defense made was they didn't get anything. They were hoping to get some evidence, but they didn't really get anything specific. The search warrant they executed at the farm, they even took swabs of the bucket in the tractor, and they found nothing. They were never able to find any trace of Crystal or to figure out what happened. Now, one of the things I said, because the defense had made such a big deal about the misconduct of the police early in the week, I said, there's a lot riding on this cross of Detective Snow. Because if you're going to come in and tell the jury that this was really dangerous, literally use the word dangerous, misconduct by the police, that this is dangerous to our justice system, then you need to produce that kind of evidence. They never did really with Detective Snow. That actually came in with some of the witnesses we're about to talk about. But let me finish up with the defense just went through a list of all the things that they did to try to find who actually caused the disappearance of Crystal Rogers, and how they never could really find any specific information pinning it on Brooks Houck. The sheriff was responsible for the fact that Brooks Houck, according to the defense, for the fact that Brooks Houck wasn't looking for Crystal Rogers or wasn't up front. The reason that Brooks wasn't was that Sheriff Mattingly, the local sheriff, asked Brooks, said, look, we're going to have a press conference and we're going to ask for help finding Crystal, but it would be better if you weren't here because her family is going to be here and they all think you did it. So it would be better if you weren't here. And he even made a statement during the course of the press conference saying Brooks wanted to be here, but I advised him not to come. So that's the defense on that. One of the most important pieces of information that the Commonwealth has is a 12:07 p.m. BAM call from Steve Lawson to Brooks Houck just after midnight, and it was only 13 seconds. The Commonwealth believes that phone call is critically important because they believe Steve Lawson was communicating something about either the car or that he completed the job of leaving the car on the side of the Bluegrass Parkway, something along those lines. And the defense is suggesting this had to do with, and they say they're going to produce evidence that this has to do with he wanted to rent one of the properties from Brooks Houck. Question, of course, why he would call at 12:07, why he would call that late. Brooks Houck was cooperative with police, and he didn't blame Crystal or take the usual avenues of suggesting other alternative theories, according to the defense. When he was asked, do you think she could have unalived herself? He said, no. Was she a heavy drinker? No. Did she do drugs? No. Was she cheating on you? No. So he could have taken these avenues and blamed her, but he elected not to do that. There were 3 phone calls where Brooks Houck called Crystal Rogers on the 4th looking for her. One at 9:06 in the morning. And remember, he woke up 6:15, 6:30, but at 9:06 he calls her. At 12:18 he calls her. And at 6:41 he calls her. The jury actually asked somebody on the jury asked a question, why, were there any messages left with those? And the law enforcement said, we don't have any way to know that. We couldn't get that information, but given how short they were, I think that's unlikely. Now, the defense also put in evidence that Brooks Houck had contacted a woman named Barbara Roby, who was a detective with the Bardstown City Police. And at 9:02 a.m. on the 5th, which is before he saw Crystal's mother that day, he wrote her and said, "Will you try to get hold of Crystal for me? I tried to call her, but no response yet." And they went back and forth, sending messages and so forth. And finally, later that morning, not very much later, she said, "This is what I get also." And he then asked, "Do you have Sabrina's number?" And then he contacts Sabrina at 9:30 that morning. "What's up? It's Brooks. Is Crystal with you?" And Sabrina says, "No, haven't seen her." So Brooks' argument is, I may not have reported it to the police main station, but I called a police officer. So you can't say I didn't report it. On July 5th, Brooks Houck wrote Crystal Rogers again at 4:33. So she's been missing. This is the second day she's been missing. And he says, "Everyone is worried sick. Why won't you text me back?" The Commonwealth introduced some text messages to suggest that the relationship between Crystal and Brooks was a lot worse than Brooks was suggesting. That 6 weeks before this incident, these text messages suggest they were having problems. Crystal wrote to Brooks saying, "I cannot deal with the way you treat me. You put me on the back burner and you do things for everyone and not for me." And Brooks told her, "Please come back home. Leaving late at night with nowhere to go is not good. Running from your problems won't fix them." Of course, the Commonwealth says this shows you're having problems, and the defense is going to say this also shows she would leave late at night with nowhere to go, and he was used to that, and it wouldn't necessarily be surprising when he woke up and found that. At least not if they were fighting, although if they had a good date, you would think it wouldn't be that way. Thank you, Mark K, aka 1. Am I saying that right? Mark K, aka 1. Oh, you watched the documentary. Good. Yes, there are other murders in the area of Bardstown. Some people think they're connected. Some people think they're not connected. One that is very close is Crystal's father, who was murdered. He was in that afternoon going to go out looking again for Crystal. He spearheaded the effort to go with her, but he was first going to go out hunting with his grandson, and he was shot. There were a lot of mysteries around that. No one's been charged. There was a very strange circumstance in one of the hearings in this particular case where the prosecutor said that Nick Houck, the brother of Brooks, had sold a gun to law enforcement. Apparently it was some kind of undercover operation. He had sold this gun to them, and it connected with 4 out of 5 of the markers of the gun that would have been used to kill the father of Crystal Rogers. But we've never heard what happened on that 5th marker that they were going to be looking for. At the time, they were going to send it off for more testing to find out about this. We've never heard about it. So will there be another charge? Maybe, but right now we have no way of knowing that. But it remains quite a mystery. So thank you very much, Mark K. All right, the Brooks Houck consented to the search of his home and his truck, and nothing was found. Nick Houck's vehicles, the white Tundra and the police cruiser, were searched. Nothing was found there. At this point, Joey Lawson's counsel gets up and he's so you didn't really mention Joey, right? And he's like, yeah, all we heard about Joey was that he didn't have any fingerprints or DNA anywhere, right? That's it. That's all you got. And they said, yeah, that's true. We did hear a lot about Steve Lawson, but they apparently did not take Joseph Lawson's phone. I don't know if it doesn't exist anymore, but they don't have any data from it. On July 3rd, okay, I already mentioned that to you. The other question the jury asked, there have only been 2, at least as far as I can recall, was were the clothes from Walmart found in the house? So, and the way I wrote it out was the clothes from Walmart found in the house? I try to write it as exactly as I can get it. The answer was no from Detective Snow, but that's sort of an ambiguous question. At first I thought they meant the clothes she was wearing at Walmart, and then I thought maybe they mean clothes she purchased at Walmart. Were they found in the house? So I don't know. Good question. Somebody wrote me about that, and I don't know. I don't know which one they mean. Marcella Ray was the next witness, and this started kind of a series of witnesses that I frankly thought were just a waste for the Commonwealth, so I'm not really going to go through them. Essentially, what the Commonwealth did was take that list, that to-do list that Brooks Houck filled up his day of the 3rd with, and they took it apart piece by piece and looked for people who could disprove it. Like, for example, people would come and say, yes, I didn't meet with Brooks Houck because we had the day off. It was July 3rd and we were closed. But the problem was, at no point in that list did he say, I met with Jane at 3:15. He didn't say anything about meeting with anybody. I thought the stronger argument was that he wouldn't make a serious list when he was asked to do so. I thought that was sort of the better argument, but they went through witness after witness with, yeah, we weren't working, or I didn't meet with him. It's just that he hadn't said he met with them. So it didn't really take the case anywhere, I didn't feel like. One thing I don't think it would be enough to reverse the case, but I did think it was an error to let this in. There was one particular witness who owned the Radio Shack, and she said Brooks Houck came in and bought a digital recorder, wanted the best digital recorder. That almost certainly is the one he used and kept in his pocket to record the statement he gave to police. Now, he had with him Eli, the 2-year-old, and according to her, he made Eli hold his head down the whole time. I don't know what that really means because they showed a picture of it to the jury, but we didn't get to see that. So I don't have a full picture of, I can kind of think of my idea of what that means. But as she described it, it sounded more like kind of a cruelty thing. I just felt like it was way too far afield. I felt like that was a mistake to put that in. Witness number 10. Cannot leave out this witness. Richie Griggs, super important. He was in the construction field, and in fact, Brooks Houck was his top client, he said. And there was this question: if Brooks Houck says you were at his house Saturday night, were you? And he said, no, I was at the lake. But I do not recall any time when we've heard Brooks Houck say that Richie Griggs was at his house Saturday night. So I don't have that in my notes. Maybe it's coming. We'll find out. Most important thing he had to say by far was he said that he heard Crystal accuse Brooks of cheating, that they were all out at the lake. He was helping them carry some stuff, and he just blurted it out that Crystal accused Brooks of cheating. The judge, there was an objection immediately. They all met, and the judge came back and said, look, that was inadmissible. It is completely stricken from the record. Forget that you heard it. What's the truth of it? When you hear something like that, it's in your head. It's very hard to just forget something like that. So honestly, that's a big task. He also said that he did know that Crystal was preparing herself to leave, and she was very worried that Brooks was going to kick her out, and he was worried he might just force her out. So she was trying to, or at least considering, making arrangements. The next witness, Danny Singleton, is the one who says Rosemary Houck wanted him to find someone to help her get rid of Crystal Roberts. Said she didn't ask him directly. He wasn't that kind of guy, but she asked him, could he help her find somebody? And if it's enough money, he said, you could probably get anything done. That's what I have written down, but somebody wrote me today and said the actual phrase is, could probably get anything done in this town. And they took that as sort of an indictment of the area. So I didn't get that in my notes, but that may well be the case. The cross of this witness was absolutely excellent, and it started a real change in the trial. The change from which, from now on, we sort of look at and evaluate what exactly have the police done, and have they coerced or pressured witnesses to make certain statements. This witness admitted at the time he drank heavily and did drugs and cocaine. And in June of 26, he was interviewed by John Snow. Do you know anything at all? And he said, no. Grand jury, 2015, anything you haven't told Snow? No. Prosecutor says specifically, have Rosemary Houck, Nick Houck, or Brooks Houck asked your assistance in killing Crystal Rogers? No. So, but during the course of that grand jury testimony, he did lie. He was asked, what did you do on July 3rd? Apparently, he didn't want to tell them. What he was really doing, he said, was doing drugs with a female named Sandy at his apartment. He didn't want to tell them that. So he made up a lie about how he went to a bar in Louisville with somebody, but it was a lie. So he was, but nothing happened to him right yet. In 2015, he was interviewed by the FBI. Rosemary Houck, do you see her having any involvement? And he said no. 12/16/2015, that's when he was charged with perjury. And the bond was set at $300,000. He was facing up to 20 years in prison because of how many counts there were. And about 4 months into that jail time, as he was waiting for his trial, he got a visit in jail from investigators. And that was the first time he said that Rosemary Houck asked him for help in getting rid of Crystal Rogers. At that point, they cut him a deal, 90-day jail sentence, and he would get released. And Brooks Houck still did not get arrested. Super big point for the defense. On the 19th of July, 2023, the Kentucky State Police talked to him. They wanted to make sure he, quote, is on the right side of it. And he said what that meant was he was to tell the truth. He also added, though, he told them that Crystal's brother also wanted to kill her, that he had threatened to kill her, he said that's true also. They've been fighting like cats and dogs. And he stated someone should take her to the woods and blow her damn brains out. So he made all of those statements. And, you know, I tell you those facts, and that's sort of antiseptic. I don't, you know, you cannot sort of imagine what it was like in the courtroom. It was he's a big guy, and it was very emotional. And I think the entire courtroom connected with this. He was clearly upset about what had happened. He clearly felt a lot of pressure, and that came across to the jury and to the people sitting there listening to the trial. And that's one of the reasons I think it set the stage for what happened the next day. Last witness of the day, window tinting. Just 2 days before Crystal Rogers disappeared, Brooks Houck had all the windows of his vehicle tinted. Commonwealth says that's so nobody can tell that Crystal Rogers was not in your vehicle. But the tinting was very dark. It was 5%, meaning only 5% of light filters through, so much that it wasn't legal. And in fact, 2 months later, he went in and asked to have it removed. Could he have it removed? And then the defense got up and said, yeah, but did he tell you that's because he got pulled over for having windows that were too dark? So that was the end of day 2. Let's move to day 3, and this one's pretty short. All right. We started with Ashley Nally, who builds houses, she admitted she had a personality conflict with Crystal Rogers, knew her for forever since they were kids, and also knew Brooks. She said she asked Brooks why he didn't leave Crystal Rogers with all the fighting, and he said, because I won't lose Eli. Cross-examination was brutal. She said they went through what she had said to the FBI. I have a problem with my memory, and I used to be a drug addict. She also told them that Crystal Rogers was a drug addict and drank every day. And said this, me and her got in an argument the week, I'm as close as I can get to writing it out, as fast as I can go. Me and her got in an argument the week before. Can't stand that girl. What was said on TV was a lie. In other words, that she was nice. She was a drug addict and drank every day. And then the final question was, and you are a convicted felon, right? And then the cross was over. Next witness, Heather Snellen. This is the biggest witness for the defense. Should have been the biggest witness for the Commonwealth. It was not. This was one of the most remarkable, strange, bizarre, interesting, I don't have enough words, cross-examinations that I have ever seen. I've never seen anything like it, I don't think. Heather Snellen dated Steve Lawson years ago. Now remember, Steve is not on trial here. He's already been tried. He's been convicted, and the jury recommended that he serve 17 years for his role in the disappearance and murder of Crystal Rogers. But his son is on trial here, Joey Lawson, and so, of course, is Brooks Houck. But Heather Snellen dated Steve Lawson, father of Joey, defendant here, and who's already been convicted. Back when they dated, they made a huge financial mistake. They bought a Chrysler 300 together. They were both on the note, and she was making payments and driving the car when someone stole it from her, and she believed it was Steve. His name was also on the note, but she was making the payments. So on July 3rd, 2015, she left work early, and there's actually a doctor's note, or I think it may be an employment note saying, that yes, she left, and there was reason for that. There was a medical reason. And she spotted that Chrysler. Well, she still had the key fob. So her husband at the time picked her up from work, and they go to McDonald's, and then they go to where this car is. She says, I've got my fob. I'm taking my car back. And so she takes that car and takes it to Boston Road, her ex-husband's grandparents. The next day, they clean out that car, and in it, they find some very important and damning stuff. They find needles, they find tourniquets, they find blankets, and they find a large bag of soured, wet clothes. Could that be clothes that people were wearing the night while it was raining and when Crystal was murdered at the farm? Could it be Crystal's clothes? And they also, in there was a Louisville Slugger bat. Could that be the murder weapon? So that's super important testimony, and that's only part of it. She says that when they, in 2017, they got back together, despite the Chrysler 300, come on. And so they get back together, and she says she overheard Steve and Joey talking about moving a body at the Houck farm with a skid steer. And here's sort of the sequence of these interviews. On October 20th, 2020, she was interviewed by the FBI. And the cross-examination was like, and they were kind to you. And yes, that's right. And you told them about this July 3rd, you got sick, you took the car, and you didn't know anything about Joey Lawson and Steve Lawson, right? That's what you told them. And 2022 FBI interview, they were kind to you. You said the same thing. They came to your house, asked you to come in. You did that. Then on August 22nd, 2023, you went to see the Kentucky State Police. Same story. So in those first 4 interviews, very consistent story about the car, stealing it back, but nothing about Joey and Steve and this comment about the body. Then on September 20th, she called the state police and said she thought of some more information, that she was a drug addict and that she was trying to get sober. She had a young child, and she was trying to get sober for this young child. So she had deleted all the messages from anyone in her life who was connected with drugs. And in fact, Joey Lawson was her drug dealer. So she deleted everything, but she remembered something. And she remembered that Joey had sent her a text message saying I don't remember what I was doing on the 3rd. Do you know? Do you have any information? I'm trying to put together a timeline of what I was doing on the 3rd. Apparently a better timeline than Brooks was going to do. So at this point, Heather was on unsupervised probation, and there was a Child Protective Services investigation ongoing into her ability to care for her child. As part of that, she had to remain clear of drugs. And she decided, so that was part of why she got rid of all these text messages. So she tells them that. And this interview is unbelievably coercive. I don't think there's another description for it. These comments were made, and there was a transcript. So I wrote it down as closely as I could get from what they were reading, or they even showed one small clip. But your life might be ruined if you don't remember more. You need to reflect on whether you want to raise your little boy. They're saying, and the question to her from the defense was, they're saying they're going to take your child away and give you a felony. Is that right? And she's like, yes. And when people say they don't recall anymore, there's another statement from the detectives in the interview. When people say they don't recall anymore, that means they're lying. She tells him, she finally tells him she overheard that comment about them moving the body, but that is not enough. And the interview goes on for another 2.5 hours past that. At one point, the detective is beating on the table, screaming at her and calling her a liar, and she has a panic attack. They continue with it. They say, we're going to take your little boy if we don't like how this ends. They say, that little boy's your life. He depends on you to hug him, to be there for him. I can hear your little boy. He loves you. Enough little boys are without their mamas. And they let her take a smoke break to sort of think about her life. And so she actually comes back at that point. She denied this, and he had to cross her with this by showing her the actual place she said this. So I assume it to be in the transcript. But and you said we were drunk and high, and I think Joey Lawson and Steve Lawson killed Christopher Rogers, which is not what she says today, and not what is being said by the Commonwealth. They're not saying that Joey and Steve actually committed the murder. They're just saying they helped around it with the conspiracy and then with the disposal of the body. And they told her they would charge her with a felony for deleting those Facebook messages, I guess, or texts with Joey. And if we find anything else, you'll be prosecuted. I don't want to have to take your little boy from you. A month afterwards, she wrote them a letter. And in the letter, she said, I hope it's clear with my statement. I don't know anything. I tried to tell you all. It felt as if I was being pressured into saying things that were untruthful. And it was, how to even describe this? One of the things that made this so different was that normally I would anticipate in a cross-examination, there's a lot of conflict because you, the attorney, are trying to show that what they've just said is incorrect or false or a lie. And so you have documents and things to prove that. And so you'll say, isn't it true that you said such and such? And they'll say no. And you're like, okay, here's the transcript. And isn't it true that you entered into this contract? No, here's the contract. Those sorts of things. So there's opposition there. In this one, she was shaking and crying and emotional about all of the things that had happened in the course of this interview. I mean, literally, just like you could see her living it and thinking about what had happened, and it's happening again in her mind. And she and the lawyer are they are in the same mode. They're both like, yes, they're upset about this. She is not a hostile witness for that period of time. She's agreeing with him. Yeah, I didn't do anything. Yeah, this was unfair. This was wrong. Then we got some cell data, and there were 3 important things, which I thought from the cell data. Let me get back here. Number one, that Brooks Houck was at the farm all day on the 3rd, and the Commonwealth wants to know why. And even more than that, so you were at the farm. why would you hide that? Why wouldn't you just say, I was at the farm? Why is this suspicious? It's your family farm. Number two, that Steve Lawson supposedly went to the car, Crystal Rogers' car, at 10:30, left it, had something to do with it there on the Bluegrass Parkway where it was found abandoned. Now, it wasn't found for another couple of days, but this is 10:30 on the evening of the 3rd, the day she disappears. And then important to the state's timeline, because then Steve Lawson calls Brooks Houck at 12:07. But the cell phone data does show that the Bluegrass Parkway is south of the towers, and they all pinged from the north. Steve Lawson says that's because I was actually on the road up here. I shouldn't say Steve Lawson says that, because he didn't say that when he got on the stand. That is what Brooks Houck's team is implying for him, is that he was actually on the road north of there, and he was trying to get back that car that his ex-wife, Heather Snellen, had taken from him. So ex-girlfriend, I think. Next, that Brooks says, I walked all over the farm with Crystal, and he was trying to say that they took up would have taken a lot of time. I think that was his point of it. But in fact, his cell phone data shows that he was really only in the top half of the farm, that he never took that path down below. That's a little weak because of the fact that you don't know if maybe he left his phone in the truck and didn't take it with him. It would be dependent on that. Then number 4, one of the things the Commonwealth depends on is the idea that Nick's phone, Nick Houck, turned off his phone from the 2nd through the 4th. They figured that's because he was involved in this conspiracy, this plan to get rid of Crystal Rogers. But there was some questioning, not totally clear at the end, but that seemed to imply that it had been off for a long time before that. It wasn't like somebody cut it off on the 2nd. It had been off. So meaning not just off, but that it was not communicating with the internet at all. It was in a dead place somewhere. And once again, Joey Lawson managed to point out that nothing in here in any of the cell data related to him. And next witness, Mary Mattingly, we only have 2 left. And she was the across the street neighbor of the Houcks, Crystal Rogers and Brooks Houck. And she noticed that morning that Crystal's car was not there. She also noticed Nick Houck going into the house after Crystal disappeared and taking out 2 white bags with handles and putting them in Rosemary Houck's car. Now, one of the facts I forgot to mention last night, and this is very sensational. You definitely want to know this fact. Rosemary Houck, according to this witness, never went over there while Crystal was there. She wanted nothing to do with it. She never came over, nor did Nick, even though Nick lived just down the street. But once there was finally this time when Crystal Rogers was gone, they started coming over every day. And Rosemary dug up the flowers that Crystal had planted in the back and dug them up and threw them all out. Wow. That is definitely a wow. All right. So once again, this witness was a convicted felon. And the prosecutor actually was able to say, and in fact, I convicted you, right? And she said, yes. There were no further questions. That had pretty much covered it. Final witness, Luke Gunther, who got off work at Lowe's at about 10 o'clock and was on the Bluegrass Parkway on July the 3rd, saw a vehicle off on the shoulder with the flashers on, which he believed to be Crystal's vehicle, because later he happened to come back by on the 5th and saw it surrounded by police cruisers. So he believes it was the same vehicle. Okay, so there you go. You were all caught up. You have the first week under your belt of the Crystal Rogers murder trial and of the trial of Brooks Houck and Joey Lawson. It was a very surprising week. There were pieces of evidence that the state had that were way stronger than we had imagined. I think in any event, that's what I think. I think some of the statements by Rosemary Houck or the statements from Crystal to Brooks about she believed that Brooks was cheating on her, Those are very important statements, even though that was marked out by the judge. As I said, it's stuck in your brain. So all of those are super important. But there were a lot of issues that were left unanswered, specifically ones around the police conduct and whether the police were coercing statements, whether they were pushing too hard. I do think it's a shame, because I think the fact that they were asking people, I think they had a lot of evidence. I don't think they had to push as hard as they did on these witnesses. And I wonder whether it will damage the case that they're trying to put together against Brooks Houck and against Joey Lawson. And boy, they better get it together with Joey Lawson, because they are not coming up to the plate yet on Joey Lawson. They are nowhere even in the ballpark. They aren't even trying yet. I think that's to come, but as of this point, it's not there yet. All right. Thank you, Janet. I appreciate that very much. Well, we're going to skip questions for tonight. We'll be back at it tomorrow at 11 Central Time, and convert that every which way. I'm going to be on Grizzly True Crime, and we're going to be talking about this case. We're going to be talking about what's going on, what's been happening inside the courtroom, and I'm going to be reporting. They've been covering it for a number of years, and so they're looking forward to having something from inside the courtroom. So join us for that. I'd love to see you there. And then I will look. I don't know if I'll go live or do anything tomorrow night, maybe something brief, but in any event, I will look forward to seeing you on Monday night when we talk again about what happens next. See you then.